Okay, I think that's us should be live now, I am assuming. Yep, okay, that's us running. I just check that that is in fact muted, and it is. Okay, hi, welcome to day 3 of QuaranCon. Before we start, I'm just going to remind you to go and visit Artists Alley and we look at our online goodies from our vendors. If you're big fans, we have merch available in our online shop. And of course, there is the QuaranCon 2021 sale, where you can get books from our brilliant panelists, etc., on sale until the 14th of April. Okay. So today we're talking about writing and publishing in a pandemic. The description of our panel is: the pandemic changed everyone's life, including writers and readers. After a year of isolation, how has COVID influenced SFF? What impact has home confinement had on the themes of the genre? Is there an increased market for low conflict SFF? Our panel discusses how the pandemic has altered mindsets and creative choices. So I'd like our panelists to introduce themselves and maybe tell us a little bit about why you're interested in the panel, but this is just please plug yourselves, tell us how great you are. And we're going to start with Victoria Corva, V.
Hi, I'm V, Victoria Corva. I'm the author of Books and Bone, A Librarians in Necromancy Fantasy, and my upcoming novel, Non-Player Character, is currently live on Kickstarter, and it's a queer portal fantasy, so that was really embarrassing, but I'm going to plug that. I'm here mostly because when the pandemic hit, it completely changed what I was going to write, and my process for writing as well. So I wanted to I'm interested in talking to other people about it as well.
Fantastic. Yeah. Okay. I think that's a lot of people felt as things did really change. J.R.H. Lawless, Jay.
Hey, thank you. Yes, so I'm J.R.H. Lawless, currently coming to you from unceded Beothuk and Mi'kmaq territory in Atlantic Canada. So I'm a lawyer by day and a repeat offender as a 2020 debut science fiction humor author with these guys, obligatory plugs, Always Greener and the Rude Eye Rebellion, that came out in 2020. So awesome timing to publish your first books. And it's been a hell of a ride, both good and bad. So yeah, it's definitely something that would be interesting to talk about, both obviously the publishing side of things and the creative side of things.
Definitely. And yeah, I would very much want to focus on the good and the bad, because there will be things that people have found difficult, but I think there will be positives that people could say has changed their outlook or how they've approached things. And that's something we'll definitely talk about. Eve, Dixon, Reuel.
Thank you, Pam. Hi, my name is Eve and I write under the pen name Dixon Reuel. I'm coming to you today from glorious Dublin, Ireland. If I look like I'm in a cave, it's not, it's just the Irish weather. The windows are open. I have a light right here and the overhead is on. So I'm sorry if I look like I'm in a cave. I'm not, it's just Dublin. I have set up Thunderloft Press and I write the Bloodbrute series. And the Bloodbrute series is about, God love them, vampires in a zombie apocalypse. So the first book, Rise of One, oh God, cave strikes again. Rise of One was published in December 2020. I began it before the pandemic and I published it in the middle of the pandemic. Book 2 in the series Fall of 2 is out this summer as well.
Fantastic, thank you so much. And Rachel Emma Shaw.
I'm Rachel Emma Shaw. I'm speaking to you today from London, and it is also bad weather. News report just in, weather is terrible in England. So my first book debuted during the pandemic. It was May 10th last year. And yeah, that was quite an experience to, I'd set up all my publishing stuff for pre-pandemic times, and then it got completely derailed. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about how that all happened.
Fantastic. And I can confirm for once in Scotland it's sunny. Which is a rare thing when I can say that the weather in Scotland is better than anywhere. So, right, good. Okay, thanks so much, guys. I think we've got a really great range of people here and a lot of really good experience to talk from. So I'm excited to get started. With our first question then, prior to the pandemic, what was your writing process like? Did it change in the wake of the outbreak? And yeah, so I think, Victoria, you mentioned that, sorry, V. See, I'm already failing here. I apologise in advance. V. I'm just going to kind of be like this.
Yeah,
and that
yeah.
way I can
That's
be
why I
visual
do it.
and verbal at the same time. We're covering
Yeah.
the bases. So V, apologies. You sort of commented that things really changed for you. So could you sort of talk a little bit about maybe how it was before and what the change was?
Oh, yeah, sure. So for me, and for I think a lot of people, the biggest change was just mental health. And like suddenly it was much harder to write what I was already working on. It was much harder to motivate myself. You kind of feel like, well, I can take a few weeks now to kind of adjust, but that you don't really adjust. So I ended up, I mean, I had a plan that I was going to publish a book, at least one book last year, and that obviously did not happen. So I'm very impressed by everyone here who did manage to publish during 2020. You are absolute champions. I don't know how you did it. I know how hard that must have been, and probably still is. But yeah, I was writing the sequel to my first novel, and I was flying through it before kind of March. And I thought this is going to be the time when, you know, I'm gonna have a really productive year. My process was I was writing nearly every day. I was feeling very confident with it. And then it hit. And then not only was it really hard to motivate myself, I no longer felt like I wanted to write something. I mean, my stories aren't especially dark, but they are about necromancers living in a cave far away from everyone else. And that was a little bit too real for me. And I wanted to write a story about people hanging out with their friends and playing board games and all of the things that I cannot do right now. So I felt very strongly that it was time for a change. And I started writing something completely different. And that was, I think, the only reason I was able to really write anything at all last year, because it ground to a halt when the pandemic hit for me.
Okay, it's interesting. I would say, I mean, your books, I mean, the setting is quite dark, but I actually always found them quite uplifting in terms of the character itself. That overall, actually, I thought it was, the setting and the idea, but you managed to kind of make it really optimistic. So although I can understand what you're feeling, I would say from your actual book, I actually thought, oh, this is a really dark setting, but I kind of don't feel it's that dark when I'm reading it because of the character. So I would say that you'd achieved that anyway, I would say. But yeah, I totally understand where you're coming from. Yeah. Rachel, what about yourself? I know you just in terms of your writing process, did you find it challenging?
I mean, I'm going to give completely the opposite spin on this, because it was challenging, but for a very different reason, in that I actually went too far into my writing. You know, I live alone. I got put on furlough by accident. I got 6 weeks on furlough at the start, and then I came back off furlough. But basically, my writing became all I had left. You know, friends, family, everyone's elsewhere. And I realized that, I mean, it's really interesting to hear V talk about, mental health, and, my writing became my one pillar holding me up throughout the pandemic, which was great for the most part, until you hit a point in the story where it's not working, and suddenly that one pillar that had been holding me up just tumbled down. And that's when, it was really interesting to me, because I run a writing group in London, and I was hearing lots of people saying what V was saying about how they're really struggling to motivate to write, and I was at just the complete other end of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's interesting, but I think that's good though, is that some people found that was their way through, whereas other people were stilted by it. And I think there has been a lot of discussion about, everyone's like, oh, it's just so hard right now, and actually it's lovely as well to hear someone that went, you know what, this saved my life, or this gave me something. And I think that's great. Okay, Jay.
Yeah, I mean, definitely relate to absolutely everything that's been said. It's weird, and even those two contrasting poles there. At the end of the day, I think we've all experienced a bit of both of those at some level. I mean, everybody's individual circumstances are different, and that always massively impacts on writing, even more so when the individual becomes that much more important in a situation like this. I'm not going to go into my own details, but
Please do, if you want
I could
to.
definitely relate. It's okay.
Okay.
Let's just say that borders are interesting and horrible things sometimes. So yeah, but what I will say and add is that one thing that I didn't necessarily anticipate so much in terms, it's had impact both again on the publishing, but here for this question on the creative side of things is other things that we've been able to come up with to try and replace and to create. And so, for instance, when, because I'm part of SIFWA, so when the Nebula Awards went virtual last year, as part of that, we then had ongoing weekly writing sessions as part of sort of SIFWA and the Nebula Conference every Sunday, which I've been a very regular participant in. I know that sort of thing has existed in the past, but I'd never personally had the opportunity or the gumption to go into it. And here, this was the first time that I really connected with an ongoing support group like that for accountability, for, you know, just sort of co-writing motivation. And, you know, that's just one example of many, which, you know, of the adaptations that have come through in the process. You know,
do you think you would ever have done that, Jay, if it hadn't been for the pandemic? Would you have reached out online like that?
Well, I hadn't up till then, so just experience would tend to show maybe not.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. No, that's great. Eve, so I know personally that you are very organized. So, you know, how did you change before and after? Do you think it made you do that, or?
Yeah, it was certainly an interesting experience. So I would work full time in like a legal accounting field that's quite exact and precise. And then we all went work from home. So you're in this pandemic, you want to do your writing, and yet you're still expected to produce 8 hours a day at quite like a professional, say, level. So writing for me became this wonderful valve on the day. You put your headphones on, you listen to embarrassing music if you have to, and you just go down the rabbit hole for 30 minutes. And if you can do that once a day, if you can do that 5 times a day, that's really what saved me. And that's what got the book over the line and the publishing process in place. It was just taking those 30 minutes, because everything else, everyone has said, like, can come on top of you quite quickly. Either it's loneliness or having to suddenly be distantly sociable. But to have writing for me was really wonderful. You do have to be very strict with yourself and headphones on and just type the words and get the story out, you know. So, but for me, on top of that, I still had to perform at, say, a professional level at an 8-hour full-time job. So the juggling of that took a bit of organization. But I think, though, as time goes on, we've kind of, I don't want to say that numbness has set in, but our coping has set in. And as everyone is going through the same process, I think that kind of universalness where you can just look at someone and go, help, or how are you, or are you struggling, I'm struggling, that kind of universal experience has also been quite good. As awful as it is, you can kind of look at people, even people you pass in the street, and be like, Jess, it's hard, but we get through it, like, we keep going.
Okay, yeah, well, thank you. That's really meaningful, sort of that escapism for you, and just to be able to, I suppose, connect with other people and see that they're all finding ways to do that. So my second question was kind of, has the pandemic influenced what you write? And I think, V, you kind of, I suppose, definitely covered that already, in terms of you felt you needed to have something that was more what you were seeking personally. Would that be a fair assessment of what you were explaining?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I completely, it was just, I just wanted some kind of like really comforting escapism and pretend that everything was normal and there wasn't a pandemic. And I thought, hopefully, when it comes out, other people will also be wanting that. But that's kind of always the thing when you're writing, isn't it? Is you're just like, well, I like this. Hopefully other people will like this. And for me, it was just, I hope other people are also lonely and wishing they were playing board games right now.
So I know several people who feel exactly that way.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, there we go. We've got people here. Yeah. I bought an updated version of Trivial Pursuit, and then because the old one, I always thought I didn't know the answers because I wasn't old enough when it first came out. Turns out I'm just stupid and I don't know anything, which was quite disappointing.
Oh, nothing is more heartbreaking than Trivial Pursuit. Yeah, you just realise how much you don't know.
Yeah, and then we were just like, right, let's play the game with hints to each other, because neither one of us. So yeah, I for years was operating under the idea that it was just before my time. Turns out
I brought a very good board game right here.
Oh, what is it?
This guy behind.
Oh, that one behind you. All right, fantastic. Well, we'll get a link up to that on the YouTube channel if you want. So we
it's
will
not
check
mine,
that.
but I mean, it is the most popular sales right now. So.
No, definitely. We'll get a link to it. We'll do that if Ty is listening. Perhaps she could find one.
Pandemic's a great game.
Okay, so what I was going to say, I know some of you, obviously, you've got like Eve, you've got your Blood Brute series, and I know that you started the book prior to the pandemic, but it did kind of marry up quite well. Nope. Why is my mother phoning me? That's just proof that she has absolutely. See, Mother, you don't know I'm on screen at the moment. I'm going to milk that later. Doesn't care what I'm doing. Right. Okay. No. So yeah. So you started before Eve, but I think there was a lot of people resonated. I know with some of your reviews, people were saying, "Oh, you know, the idea of this isolation that goes on within your story." So anything that you've kind of learned from the pandemic, do you feel like that's going to be reflected in your plot or narrative going, or characters going forward, or was it already there for you?
Yeah. Excuse me. So you're writing post-apocalyptic pandemic sci-fi. There's tropes you're going to hit, like, you know, there's the guy who gets bitten and hides, those kind of things. But I think when the pandemic came here, we went to level 5 quite quickly, and a lot of, like, I'm in the, say, the quite center of Dublin, so the city, the traffic went, the sound went. And this is during, say, about halfway through Rise of One, the main draft of it. And suddenly there was no sound in the city. And that was quite eerie day to day. And it made me realize that needs to be incorporated more into a book where I know it's vampires surviving a plague, zombie apocalypse, but sound was something I went back and reworked throughout the book. Because here we had this one moment where, so the day was, it was quiet out, little traffic, little people going, little amounts of people going out. Low foot traffic. There we go. That's a better way of saying it.
Okay, good. We got there.
Should pull that one back. And then what happened was the power went out, say on my street, on the whole block. So suddenly we've no electricity and we've no internet, and you only have the power that's left on your phone. And that's when the real silence came. And then in the distance, this alarm starts to say, oh fuck, we've no electricity. It's that real wailing, every couple, like 10 seconds alarm.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one point looking at the window. I remember getting up from writing. I remember that so clearly, at the keyboard, and just going to the window because the house had gotten colder because like the heating wasn't on. And you look out the window and you go, oh, it could start very quickly. This is how it starts. This is kind of how it feels like. The electricity grid has gone down. Of course, my little writer brain was like, the electricity grid has gone down. The zombies are coming. We better get, what was our zombie plan that I had with my partner? Like, you know, that we planned just in case. So I think sound, and you are suddenly very vulnerable. We think we're safe inside the lovely four walls of wherever we are. But I definitely wanted to add that into Rise of One. You're not safe behind your walls. And when the conveniences of society break down, when the silence comes, I went back and that really added to the story I was trying to tell.
That's amazing. No, that actually felt myself feeling quite, I don't know if you guys, quite, you know, when you just sort of described the power going out and then the wailing and yeah, I mean, I've never been quite in that situation, but there's been occasions where I've got up early on a weekend, like on a Sunday, and I've had to pop out for something and I don't see another car, and you're kind of like, has there been a zombie apocalypse and nobody told me? You know, and it's a brief moment, but it's in daylight and I'm kind of in my car, not quite what you're describing. And I actually quite felt that quite visceral, you describing that, how frightening, and the silence. That's, yeah.
The description of the, you know, not being safe in your, I was like, oh, okay, I suddenly start feeling a little bit scared there.
Yeah.
Oh, I was
like we immediately like grabbed for our lifelines, for our phones, and going, okay, we have 36% battery. How long is this out? And the really worst part is we live near like an army barracks, and they started doing their marching drill, and it was just like, oh the zombies are here. I was just like, type faster, girl, just type faster. If you die, the book will be on the screen and someone will read it in the zombie apocalypse.
Only if your battery lasts a really long time, you'll be all right.
Actually, the electricity was out, so yeah.
Yeah, it's okay. Nobody will
like,
see it. We won't see your unfinished draft. Don't worry. But yeah, oh God, yeah. No, that's great.
Yeah. It was just one of those moments where you're like, oh, I'm telling that one at a a panel conference one day. That's the story to tell.
If you survive, congratulations.
Yeah, if you survive. In the minute this is over, we're all going to pack an emergency zombie bag. Is anybody else feeling that they're not prepared and needs to get a backpack?
Do.
Okay. Jay, if you want to sort of pick up there and sort of, because I think a lot of your books, you know, it's a social commentary, really, isn't it? Dystopian in future, but you know, you deal with social commentary and a lot of times through humor. So is this something that you could see pushing into your future books more so?
Well, even present ones, because in terms of writing process and where I was, so Always Greener came out in sort of end of February, beginning of March. So I had time to do one bookstore event in Halifax, Canada. Then obviously everything went the way it went. And so, but at that time I was working on, I think maybe finishing the draft, but I was mainly working on edits, sort of working through the edit letter and the final edits on the Reuel Rebellion. Again, thanks to William Shakespeare for being so old that I was able to rip off a lovely expression of his that was never used as a title before. As you say, it's all about the humor and just absurd sort of reality TV, social commentary, whatever, but it's also very political underneath all that. And it really massively motivated me both in the Reuel Rebellion and in the third book, which I'm currently in the same sort of status now, third book in the series, working through my edit letter from my publisher on currently. Really just extra motivation to go even deeper into what I'd already intended, basically burning it all down and seeing, how we get there and where we go from there. And yeah, I mean, seeing how dysfunctional our different political responses to a crisis such as that one, were getting around the globe at varying levels, is just really, really, and politicizing something like something as deadly and as crucial as a pandemic like this one, just really shown that much more grist to the mill of how important it is to use speculative fiction, which is such a powerful tool to envisage other ways of doing things.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's good. Well, that kind of leads into my question, which Rachel, I'd like to start with you, if that's okay. Which is like the coronavirus has highlighted a lot of weaknesses in our society, which is what Jay was just saying. And obviously SFF can be an excellent tool for the genre for examining that through a lens. Your books, sort of kind of felt they very much strike at the essence of who you are, sort of taking away memories.
Yeah.
And I think a lot has been stripped from people in the pandemic. So, in terms of you wrote that before, do you think that's more relevant now? Is that a theme that we'll see more of in SFF, starting with yourself and then kind of broader into the genre? What are your thoughts?
I've not thought of that. Yeah, I like the angle that because it's all about how memories affect our identity. And yeah, I feel like this year we did all have our identity stripped from us, taken from us, and limited, and we were forced to be someone we're not. So yeah, I'd love to see that explored more. Quickly runs off and starts writing his notes down.
No, you have to stay for another 35 minutes.
Okay. Focus. But one thing I did think I saw a lot of in terms of societies, it was interesting to hear mention of like the political system and across the world, and we very much were subject to how things changed out of our control in society. And this is something that I saw in both the sequel to Lawless that I was working on and a third book that I've been working on during the pandemic, was that I feel very out of control as a member of society. I feel like my societal identity has just completely changed from what I thought it was pre-pandemic, because the rules have changed. The governments are making decisions that we're not feeding into, and all this stuff. I very much I started exploring societal identity in the next couple of books that were written during the pandemic as a response to that. So yeah, I think everyone's been really questioning who they are and what their place in society is right now.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. That's a really good answer. I think the political aspect of that you're saying there is so interesting, because I think we all have felt, sorry, I shouldn't speak for everybody, I apologise. I very much felt like this has been out of control, and I'm watching some of the decision and going, what are you doing? You know, and having I think, Rachel, you have a scientific background as well, much like myself, you know, as a biologist, and I'm kind of looking at it and going, no, that's not going to work. It's like watching like a car drive off the edge of a cliff and being powerless to stop it. So I love that you've taken looking at that, and I think, which kind of sort of leads into my later questions about how much about this do we want to read. But personally, maybe not quite always I want to know about a pandemic, but I do want to explore the themes of it in other genres. So V, can I direct that next part of that to you then, which is just to kind of follow on and saying that, you know, what do you think about exploring the sort of some of the issues that we've come across during the pandemic in SFF books? What are your thoughts about what would you like to see explored?
I mean, I'm really interested in the ways in which this has changed the way we think about how we connect with people and what is and isn't like a real relationship. Like, I've seen a lot of people stop using the words in real life about people that they met in person as their friends. It used to be your IRL friends and your online friends, and it's very clear right now they're all online friends now.
Yeah, that's a great point.
You meet in person and there's people you meet online, and there's not necessarily any difference between the two. I guess I'm very interested in the ways in which that's the ways that we connect with each other when we're not able to see each other, and the ways that we do in comparison, if you see what I mean. I'd love to read more things exploring online relationships. I'd love to read more things exploring how the relationships change when they move from one category to the other, from in-person to online, from online to in-person. I just think it's shown up a lot of very interesting things about how we participate in society when we're all online, all of the things that are going on. I just think it's changed the landscape of what it means to be in person, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Okay, I'm going to open that up to either Jay or Eve, because we've got a lot of stuff and we haven't touched on any of the publishing things yet. So I'm aware that I ramble. So I want to give you guys, either one of you, a chance to jump in on your thoughts about that in terms of themes that we're likely to see in SFF books, or, you know, how we could examine them through the lens of the genre. Either one, feel free to jump in.
I'll just put up my
like
hand quickly.
You're going.
It actually combines in a little bit with publishing, so we'll segue to make it.
No, absolutely. Listen, if it doesn't matter the order, natural progression. Please do.
I saw a really interesting question on Twitter of all places the other day. Do we address the pandemic going forward? As in, are we now writing, excuse me, even in SFF, are we now writing in a post-COVID world? Or is SFF going to forget about the pandemic for a while and then maybe come back to it maybe in a few decades later? So
did you hack my computer and read my questions?
Is that one of your questions? I saw it on Twitter. I'm
only noising you up. It wasn't quite phrased like that. I'm just saying, but yeah, no, I was going to come to that. So please, yeah, let's talk about it.
Sure. It was a very interesting question because so much of Twitter is noise, and then you do find the gem stop you in your tracks, and you're like, oh, that's interesting. So it'd be really interesting to see, say, for example, someone is writing, you know, your Star Trek space adventure, a new genre comes out, new book series, new universe comes out. And do they ever go, oh yeah, the pandemic of Earth of 2020, one that fucked up? Is that going to happen? Will we reference it? Or will we ignore it? I really wonder what will come from that. I think that's really interesting to explore.
A really sad point to add in here, because it's interesting, because you mentioned about you being a biologist, Pam. I'm terrified of the next pandemic, because I'm thinking this is the century for pandemics. Like, we don't think this is going to be the biggest one of the 21st century. So I think in terms of publishing, because I know someone who was publishing a book about a pandemic that got pulled because they were like, no, now it's not time for this. So I think we're going to have cycles of you know, we're in a pandemic, don't publish about a pandemic. The pandemic's over, publish about a pandemic. Oh no, there's another pandemic, don't publish about the pandemic. So I think there will be tiny windows when we will discuss the COVID pandemic as part of SFF, and for the rest, maybe it won't happen so much.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I do worry about it. I mean, but then in the day, you know, like some sort of super Ebola or something, but if it's, you know, that's pretty unlikely. If it's any help, before I freak anybody out, Ebola is actually very hard to catch. You kind of have to like lick somebody with it just about to catch it, or drink body fluids, so you're probably fine. So things, the more transmissible the virus is, the less deadly it tends to be. That exists in nature as a kind of, you know, if you kill your host quickly, you don't get to spread. So if that makes anybody feel better, there's some biological fact about it for you.
Kind of does.
Yeah. Most viruses become less deadly with time as well, not more deadly. Although COVID's doing its best to make me look like an ass for saying that at the moment. But yeah, traditionally that's the pattern. Okay, so Jay, can I then just lead on from what Eve was saying and ask you then?
Yep.
So would you be a favourite if it was a contemporary book? I know that you write future dystopian and you've addressed a lot of these issues anyway. If it was a contemporary book, what would your feelings be about someone going, well, I'm just going to pretend the pandemic didn't happen because it doesn't fit into my narrative? Would you be fine with that, or do you feel it needs to be addressed?
That's a really good question. I think obviously it depends on, as you say, on the narrative and what the goal of the book is. But personally, you know, the first books in the series are very much, even the set in, you know, 2070s, you know, classic, you know, near future. Actually, it's really today, but you know, we've added some gizmos in. And already in the first book, obviously written pre-pandemic, I had things in there. One of, because it's based around, just very briefly, so this reality contest set in the 2070s, where the concept has been pushed so far and has been exploited so much that all that's left is to have a reality show trying to find where contestants compete from all around the world to prove who has the worst life and who has the worst job and who is the biggest victim, and compete for bragging rights as biggest victim. So the whole system just eating itself, basically. And one of those contestants is a germ bouncer. So his job is to enforce these very strict laws with all these completely super invasive medical sensors that are everywhere. And as soon as something is reported as a potential outbreak site, either at a public restroom or at a private home or whatever, you know, they come in, you know, with military strength or paramilitaries, or they deal with it, you know, before it can be a thing. And you know, that was absurdist at the time, but sort of in retconning, it kind of almost makes sense after something like the 2020-2021 pandemic, that you could then see how that could lead to extreme measures and to people accepting completely invasive abandon of any sort of privacy rights, anything, as a result of what we've been through. So, you know, and we are still going through. So, you know, it's, I think that it does need addressing, even if it's, in this case, it might just be retconning to say, aha, that was why that happened. But that's why I had that in the first book. But I think it does definitely need addressing. It's fundamental. Now, as to whether people want to read that sort of thing, I mean, I think a lot of books were pulled simply because nobody wanted to publish anything, pandemic related or otherwise, for a long time. I just managed to sort of convince my small press publisher to squeak in the second book in September as planned, because I had my articles planned with, you know, John Scalzi and Mary Robnick Kowal and other awesome folks who are great to help promote things. And I, you know, didn't want to lose the benefit of that. So we had like a soft release in September, and then whatever, but it turned out being a complete mess, by the way. But you know, a lot of publishers did not want to publish anything and pushed everything back to first quarter 2021 or even further. I'm not sure that necessarily directly impacted pandemics. I know a lot of pandemic books, particularly backlist, sold exceptionally well. And
and there seemed to be like films like Contagion and Outbreak and stuff. People were suddenly watching all these TV shows
binge
about it, and
everything.
there's a bit of an appetite, and I've seen quite a lot of like short fiction and novellas and like digital sellers. It seems to be stuff that's sort of battered out there to kind of meet a demand, and yet the bigger publishers are kind of going, people don't want that. But strangely, actually, there is quite a lot of stuff. Like I've seen
this was the best-selling board game was Pandemic during the pandemic by far.
So I think maybe they've pitched that, or maybe it's the content. I mean, I haven't read a lot of the ones like I'm talking about. I've just seen that there are short stories or novellas or wee collections about pandemics. And I suppose my question then, and V, I'll come to you first, and then Eve, if you can follow up on it as well, is just that, do you think that maybe that those shorter fiction that we're seeing is the fact that it's maybe about the pandemic, or do you think actually with the way people are feeling, they maybe want something a bit shorter? Is it the pandemic content, or is it actually that it's wee short novellas that they like in the current environment where people maybe don't have the capacity to focus for as long? I know personally sometimes I trail off where I wouldn't have before, watching something or whatever. V, what do you think?
Oh, I think you've hit on both points exactly, honestly. I think that there is an appetite for pandemic fiction, and people are constantly talking about books that predicted the pandemic because they had the kind of viruses that behaved the way that COVID does in them, and those books then sell really well. But also people's attention span right now, I speak to so many people who are really struggling to read in the last year, people who've been struggling. They say that they've only been reading anthologies or short stories because they can't sustain their attention as long as they did before. So I mean, I definitely think that people need short stories in order to kind of get that kind of story and fictional kind of diet still. But I think also if you're going to react to the pandemic and release pandemic stories in order to fill a niche that is current, it's possible that big publishers just can't really do that very well right now because they don't move as quickly. And so you get the small publishers and the indie publishers and self-published authors just putting stuff out there because they can do it quickly and because they're processing those emotions right now. So of course they're writing those stories.
Okay. Eve, so if you can comment on that as well, and whether or not you think that's likely to be a long-term change or whether you think it's going to shift back.
I think there is the trend lately of the public has a better appetite for shorter fiction. I think the kind of technological availability, books on your phone and Kindle, blah, blah, has dovetailed with the kind of pandemic mindset of just not being able to take in heaving, sprawling epics at the rate we used to. Well, what was interesting lately here, what happened was a Irish journalist, quite a prominent one, she came out and with an article where she was literally like, I don't want to see mention of pandemic in any fiction next year, this year. She was just like, she had her opinion, she took her side, she staked her claim. She was like, I don't want to see any pandemic, don't even think about it. And she mentioned a very interesting word. She was like, no bandwagoning. And I thought this article would go out in kind of a blaze of whatever, and people would be like, brush it off. The amount of people who agreed with her was really surprising. And these would be people from, say, the traditional publishing world, not just of fiction, but of, say, newspapers and journalism as well. That the kind of sense of bandwagoning, of jumping on a pandemic crisis to sell your book was really distasteful to quite a large chunk of public that I didn't think was there. And it's quite surprising to me. So I don't know, is that related to just the more traditional journalist publishing world having a distaste for pandemic stuff? But I do like the kind of point that V made about people just have more of an appetite for shorter fiction. So whether that'll lead to shorter pandemic fiction, just to kind of get it out of our system and address it in some capacity and leave the traditional publishing houses to not address it, that'll be really interesting to see how that's going to play out going forward. When the next pandemic comes.
Oh no.
We know what to do. It's okay. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to move on to the next question. Obviously, there's authors, etc., writers, publishing houses are suffering from dropping revenue. Overall, publishing has seen a roughly 10% drop in sales, with the adult market dropping about 26%. Recently, although I will say with an addendum that is primarily print sales. Okay, so don't everyone go, oh, really? that's print, and that's partially, of course, because bookshops are closed, although people, I think, still are buying print. So basically, it was kind of like looking at that publishing. So have you seen, changes to, in terms of if you had a plan going forward of how much of you was going to be print or how much of you was going to be digital, has that changed significantly? And I know, Rachel, that obviously you've your plans for this year were somewhat thrown. So if you want to start us off with that.
I mean, it's difficult because I am, like I said, I published my first one right at the start of the pandemic, so I don't really have a comparison of what publishing was like beforehand.
Did you have an idea of what you think it might have been, though, and then how different was it? Would that be maybe a better way to examine it?
I was planning on doing things like local readings and in local bookshops and libraries, and that was going to be a big part of, because I wanted to build up a community in the part of North London I'm in. And I had like a whole book launch party planned where the guy, we'd actually been making a cocktail that was on theme with the book. And I had all this, it was going to be absolutely...
Really? Okay, I need a recipe for that, please. After the fact, send it and we'll post it.
So in my book, you've got characters who can steal memories by touching, and the memories are like stored on the hands of these like black marks that just like worm. And I want the cocktail is going to like have like blackness like trickling down like vines.
I love it.
But I'm like, all right, this is not cancelled. This is just postponed. We're coming. We will do this at some point. Anyway, bigger, better party. But yes, I had all these things in mind for, I guess, the first year of the publishing. But I think that's one of the beauties about being self-published, was that I never had anything set in stone. I was always planning on seeing what worked and what didn't and adjusting with it. So maybe I've naturally been adjusting to the pandemic. I just didn't realize that there was more pandemic in what I was doing than I thought.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, thank you. Jay, do you want to, I know that you said you managed one bookshop and then, oh no. So, do you think that's impacted you, or have you managed to make it up in other ways, do you think?
It's massively impacted, clearly. Obviously working with with a small traditional publisher, there was a plan in place. It was what it was, but it definitely involved a lot more physical than ended up being possible. So then it was just, obviously, with the first book, my debut science fiction humor releasing right at the beginning of the pandemic, having to scramble to try and improvise and see what the new situation was and what the tools available were. Last year's QuaranCon was one of them, for instance, but also Nebula Conference, WorldCon, which I ended up attending and speaking at for the first time ever, on both accounts, both attending and speaking. World Fantasy Convention, and probably a dozen other really amazing virtual conferences, groups that just sparked up to help replace things, and that completely changed the landscape of what we can do. Now, as a direct consequence of that, obviously, ebook sales have been massively more important than any other format, and that's including audio, which both my books are also audiobooks with Tantor Media, and even those have been impacted by the pandemic massively, and then clearly the print, whether it's paperback or the hardcover for the second book. It's been almost nothing compared to what the ebook side of things has been, and what the digital side of things has been. So yeah, and then trying to figure out how you can do things like like I was saying, that the hardcover, still trying to have something special and adapt to what we can do, and not being able to do signings. One thing that we did was we offered, and still active actually, for people who purchase the special edition hardcover of The Rude Eye Rebellion, which is the second book, as long as they let me know on Twitter, I write a special edition, a sort of special limerick for them, having to use
That's
words,
a nice idea.
having to incorporate words that they give me. So the worst words, like you can imagine.
Right, you heard it here. J.R.H. Lawless has set a challenge for you. Hit him up on Twitter. He's got his Twitter handle.
And I will then send that on a postcard, so you'll have your physical thing.
Go and make him do the limericks. Do it, guys. Do it.
How did you do that to
I'm
yourself?
game.
Oh my
Bring it.
goodness.
Bring it on.
No,
That
listen,
challenge.
Bring it on.
right after I pack my zombie apocalypse bag, I'm going onto Twitter to find words to send you. That's my plan.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody's doing that.
Amazing.
Say, V, what about yourself? Again, what do you kind of feel? Were you mostly ebooks? Do you do paper copies as well? Do you feel like your levels of them changed throughout the pandemic?
So yeah, I'm another self-published indie author. So almost all of my sales are digital. I do have paperbacks, but generally those are from people who they strongly want a paperback, rather because obviously there's a price differential. They're more available in ebooks. So
paperbacks.
Well, they feel so nice. Though.
I know. I love reading a real book. I know ebooks are the thing, but I love paper. I love them.
I buy the ebook and then I get the paperback normally, which is a terrible way to spend money, but that is what I do.
Well, if you love it, it's not at all. If it makes you happy, it's all good.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think I didn't really see changes in the sense that my presence as an author and in interacting with other people has always been online, and I would definitely never be in front of anyone speaking on a panel with like lovely impressive authors like you if it wasn't online. So actually QuaranCon for me is like, wow, I love this. I love the whole setup. Doing this from home 100%. You're all very lucky I'm not in my pajamas right now. So like,
well, thank you for dressing up for us.
Yes, no, I absolutely did.
I'm lucky.
Well, it's actually something we have talked about in the, last year we said we hope QuaranCon won't run next year. It did, and actually it's been great, but whether or not there are a lot of people who actually enjoy this anyway, it could run again next year, even if there is no lockdown, simply because we've got people across continents and we're all getting together and in ways that we might never be able to do. And I think, there is probably an appetite for it going forward. We hope. So Eve, let me ask you then, so are there any writing and publishing avenues that you haven't been able to explore in the last year that when lockdown is over that you want to move into? So you can maybe talk a little bit about what things you have done for marketing or publishing, and then if there's anything you've not been able to do that you'd like to do.
Well, I think this is one of the reasons why I'm an indie author and why I set up like my own little press. You have, like, what's been so clear this year is the agility that comes with that. If I was with a traditional, say, Big Five publisher who had a taste for gay zombies in a vampire apocalypse, the story would be different. But I think what's wonderful about, to sing the praises of indie publishing a little bit, is that you can react so quickly to a pandemic, so quickly to a lockdown, so quickly to, paperback sales are in the toilet. How are your ebook sales? Are they taking off? And I think you naturally come to writing with a little bit more of a marketing perspective as an indie rather than, say, a traditional published author, if I may blanket statement that. I think what I've seen, say from my end, is I write SFF anyway. That's always going to have a much more of, I think, of an ebook presence than, say, a paperback presence. Ebooks have been my main seller, say, but interesting markets have popped up for paperbacks, and I'll tell you what. So when I planned the Blood Brute series, I particularly, not to flash the book again, but look, I went for a very deliberate graphic cover.
We can't actually see it in the dark. Hang on.
Hang on. Let me put it to the sun.
I think we may have a brighter version over there. Yay.
There you go.
Bless you, Pam. Look at that. Jesus.
Do you know what? It's signed and everything.
No, don't show that. Oh, jeez. I'm just going to log off now. Thanks. Bye.
Hey, no, don't. You can't go anywhere.
I know. I literally can't go anywhere. Listen,
Sorry,
anyway,
please, your beautiful cover. Tell us.
My beautiful cover.
Yes.
If anyone wants my illustrator's details, she's amazing. Anyway, so the purpose of that is obviously like branding from the marketing perspective and having a Blood Brute book when you see it has the big eyeball. But book sales handle themselves. But what's been great for paperbacks, wished the lottie, is so say for the more graphical friendly social media platforms, the Bookstagrammers, the booktubers, the book bloggers, I've sent more paperbacks to them than I have in sales, purely because they can start like posing it and doing flat lays, and I've had great success with that, say from the marketing perspective. And then what's really interesting as well is the EU market. I've started doing, say, Amazon advertising for the EU market. They love their paperbacks. I don't know what's going on in Germany, but they buy all the paperbacks in Germany.
I guess that would depend on
because,
whether you're lucky enough to still be in the EU, wouldn't it?
No comments from Paddyland, no comments. But yeah, I think to actually answer the question was marketing. Look, I think if you're a writer, if you're anyway like me, God love you, but I don't like leaving the house. And these kind of cons that are virtual, give me more. Virtual book launches, yes. In-person events, no. I think that's the way book marketing is going, particularly for the kind of science fiction fantasy genres. I really think it's going that way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so if I was to sum up, then Eve, you're saying that, you know, you found that this has suited you, hasn't it? It's been a kind of positive experience, and you think that that's not necessarily just a result of the pandemic, but that going forward, it's a way forward for a lot of people.
It's a result of the pandemic. It's a result of the genre I write in. It's a result of being an indie that have all dovetailed together. Thank you for surmising that so nicely, Pam.
You are welcome, my darling. Okay, right. Well, I've got a bunch more questions, but will we have a quick look at YouTube and see what people are asking us? Do you guys want to do that?
Yeah.
Okay, let's have a wee look-see. Right, so what we're saying, they can see us. Good. Oh, someone's saying it's not nice in this part of Scotland. So, okay, sorry. People have asked us what we've written. We've sort of talked about that. Okay, so sort of asking us, so is there any market for hopeful pandemic narratives? Amanda Justice has sort of suggested, you know, is it, you know, we've talked a lot about, I suppose, this is people being isolated. Is there a happy pandemic story anybody would like to write? Like a pandemic that made everybody laugh? Like, you know, a disease that just made you feel brilliant and gave everybody joy?
I don't know if that's what they necessarily mean by a happy
not.
pandemic story. I mean, it could work. You know, you'd have to get the conflict in there, but it could work. I think it comes back to sort of hope punk as a genre. I think in that, you know, we write science fiction, we write speculative fiction in general. You know, it's important to acknowledge, and especially in a pandemic context, you know, the grim side of things, the negativity, the punk side of things, but then also to have the hope, you know, blended in there in terms of outcomes, in terms of being able to, you know, to defeat, you know, it's not a fatality, and, you know, being able to build stronger, you know, for having been through that, and more resilient. And, you know, in a way, yeah, a pandemic is a crisis in the almost literal sense. If you've read my books, you'll see I do a lot of etymology and footnotes, usually tongue in cheek, but going into into the origins of the words. Some of the words we use, which have amazing origins compared to what we do. We're not aware of the actual meaning behind the words as we're using them in the connotation. So there's tons and tons of them. And crisis is a good one. Crisis in, we have biologists here in the medical sense, is originally the tipping point moment where a body can either die from an illness or recover. And so that's that crisis is what it means in the original Greek. And, you know, and that's what pandemics are as well. You know, they are the point where you can either, you know, collapse or head towards something new. And I think that's where the hope comes in. So just to come back to the question, I think you can definitely have it positive and have it hopeful, while still acknowledging, you know, the realities.
Yeah. So nobody's planning on writing a happy virus story then?
It could work. Kind of am now, so maybe. But
Yeah, okay. Eve, I'm afraid there's an awful lot of people asking what your embarrassing music you listen to is, so I think they're going to force an answer from you. I
don't approve of this bullying and ganging up. I'm here to talk about writing and publishing.
It's not me that's doing it, it's the audience.
I have a playlist on YouTube I will share on my Twitter after this.
Fantastic. That's a brilliant
I'll
answer.
unprivate it.
Okay. Okay, so I think that's kind of most of it. A lot of people just saying they're really loving what you're saying and, you know, really liking the chat and, you know, making some really good points. Let's see, Annabelle, as always, being awesome and saying no, buy the books on ebook, and Annabelle fully approves of buying the ebook and the paperback. So V, we're justifiably saying that's a wonderful use of your money.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Being validated.
Okay. Right, so there's a lot of stuff we didn't get to. We've only got about 5 minutes left. We maybe have a couple of minutes leeway at the end. I know there's an event starting at 15:15. So just trying to thinking what's a good question to finish up on, sorry. I've covered quite a lot of that. Okay, industry experts are predicting more traditional authors moving into indie publishing in the wake of the pandemic. I think, Eve, you've touched on that slightly in terms of that control. Rachel, would you agree that that might be the case, and why?
Yeah, I definitely think you're already seeing it. I think we're maybe not switching fully. Maybe they'll become more hybrid. So, you know, they have a few traditional, have a few self-published. And I think if I was in their position, the reason I'd be doing it is just security. You know, you have your fingers in more pies. If something happens in the future, you're able to flex. You've also, if you're fortunate enough to have something traditionally published and then go into the self-publishing world, well, you've got the insight of you understand marketing from what the experience you've gained in traditional. You've maybe already got a bit of an audience built up. It's probably easier than going at it the way, you know, a lot of us are doing it, self-published, and maybe going traditional one day. Yeah, I really think it's to do with just making sure that you are able to adapt wherever the rest of the 21st century is going to take us, because as the last year has shown us, none of us know.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I think that's great. V, what do you think about that? Would you agree that, or anything you would like to add to it?
I mean, yeah, I think generally a lot of authors are beginning to become hybrids and if they start in trad, they then also do self-publishing. And already, even before the pandemic, there was a sense that there are some genres that do better self-published, so you might as well do both. And as you say, have the security of having your finger in more pies. But yeah, I think I suspect, judging by the number of people who've had very disappointing, and my heart breaks for them, very disappointing debuts in traditional publishing in the last year, because they put the work in, they got the agent, they got traditionally published, and they were waiting for that traditionally published experience and then didn't get to have it. And my heart completely breaks for them. I can see how they might think, well, I might try a bit of self-publishing as well, because I'm already, I'm not always going to get the traditional publishing experience, even if I have kind of gone that route. So yeah, I don't know, that's just, it's a bit sad, but that's kind of my...
No, I think that's a valid point. Okay, well, I'm going to ask you all the last question. Annabelle on YouTube has asked us if you had one tip to give your baby author self for the start of your publishing journey, not writing advice, but publishing journey, what would you tell yourself? And that kind of links into my final point, which is, if you've learned one thing about publishing during the pandemic, what would it be? So you can combine that. Jay, I'll come to you. Then Eve, V, and Rachel, just as quick as you can, guys, because we've got about 3 minutes.
Yeah, right, quick as we can. Try to focus as much as possible on things you can control, and try not to focus at all on things that you can't. As an example, we talked about the traditional publishing experience. We had an exciting Barnes & Noble, brick and mortar order for Always Greener. It was coming out. There were, I think it was 300 books for starters. And then, with the potential to escalate from there, and it was all very exciting. Those books are still in a warehouse in Nashville somewhere, in an Ingram warehouse, because then immediately that hit, everything was frozen. It's still in limbo land. Same thing for any order on the second book, and there's not a damn thing you can do about that. Other than potentially encourage direct purchases through the publisher, Uproar Books, anyway. But there's nothing you can do about it. So, focus, spend your time and your energy, if possible. It's hard. It's easy to say, it's hard to do, but focusing on things you can control, and really do as much as you can. Try and avoid obsessing over things you just cannot do anything about.
Okay, yeah, that's great advice. Okay, Eve, your baby publishing self, or what you've learned.
Yeah, no, Jay, that's really spot on advice. You can only control what you can control. My advice to my wee baby self would be to think longer term, think in terms of a career, beyond just one book that you may feel that you only have in you.
Eve's frozen.
So,
okay.
Zombies again.
The zombies have got her. V, we'll come back to Eve. Do you want to?
Oh yeah, okay. So my advice would be, a lot of people talk about how in a publishing career you're always looking to the next thing and feeling bad about the place that you're at now, and never feeling as legitimate as you will be when you've published 5 books, when you've had an award, when you've had a traditional publishing contract. And I've kind of found that it's very easy to get into that mindset. And the more that you deliberately and consciously try and enjoy the place that you're in now and the moment of the publishing that you're in now, the more enjoyable the whole experience will be. So just like enjoy every victory. You don't have to be looking to the next one. Hello.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, enjoying the moment. I think that's really important. Taking pleasure in what you have achieved. V, I think that's a really good point. And I think we could all do that better. Eve, do you want to finish off your wee point, and then Rachel, I'm coming to you to finish us off.
Sure, I didn't know how much of that you caught, but the short and small of it is just think longer term. Think in terms of a career. You're not just one book, you are so much more than that.
Okay, I think that's wonderful advice. Rachel?
Just in terms of try anything. Like I learned so much in the first 6 months of publishing, things that I was not expecting, audiences I didn't expect my books to land with, and don't go in with preconceptions. Just start from scratch and don't be afraid. If something doesn't work, that's it. It didn't work. Move on to the next. You never know what will. Okay.
Sages and mages in here for sure. Thank you so much, guys. That was absolutely brilliant. Can I just thank everybody watching on YouTube. There's a lot of love for you guys out there. Really thanking you for your great advice, etc. So thank you,
to
Pam. Victoria Corva,
amazing moderating.
Thank you very much to J.R.H. Lawless, to Dixon, Reuel, and Rachel Emma Shaw. You guys are stars. Thank you so much for your time. This is 100% volunteers, including all our panelists, and we wouldn't have a panel without you. So we really appreciate you coming on, and you guys have been fantastic. To find out more about our panelists, you can obviously go to the profile pages of our website. They have all their links in there, so please go look them up, hit them up on Twitter. Make sure particularly you hit up Jay and give him your words for your limerick. Sorry, I'm going to just push that till the end of time.
Grab one of these and it's yours.
Yeah, brilliant. So please go check out our panelists. As I say, they've given up their time and they're there, so that we'd love if you had a look at them. Remember, our cosplay and visual arts contests are still running, so you've got a chance to get your costumes in and your artwork, and there are amazing prizes to be won, book bundles. After this, we've got 2 readings coming up, Alex S. Bradshaw and J.E. Hannaford, both of which I'm looking forward to, followed by a book formatting workshop with E.L. Drayton, and I think that's something a lot of writers probably don't know as much about as they could, so I'm excited to hear about it, and I hope you will join us. Okay, so I think that's pretty much us. Taya, are we ready to finish? I hope. Okay, yep, okay, so thank you very much again, guys, and bye-bye.
Thank you, see ya. Bye.